Welcome to our Women's Philanthropy Board virtual roundtable on the Mediterranean diet. My name is Kim Walker, and I serve as the director of the Women's Philanthropy Board. And in case you are not familiar with Women's Philanthropy Board, we are an educational outreach program in the Auburn University College of Human Sciences. And WPB serves as the flagship division of the Carey Center for the Advancement of Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies, which also includes programs for youth such as Camp iCare and the community such as the Nonprofit Affiliate Program. This is our 8th virtual roundtable since our new normal has taken effect. And we've had some great sessions so far, and we have some great sessions coming up. So I hope that you are on our email list or you're on our Facebook friends list so that you are receiving notifications when we have these events. We also have our inaugural book club. And so if you are interested in reading about how to pass on your non-financial legacy, we would love for you to join us for our book club. WPB is a membership organization, and all of our educational programs, mentoring initiatives, and philanthropic impact are funded by our 200 individual members and 25 corporate and business partners. And if you are not a member and you would be interested in learning more about how to support WPB and our programs, please let me know. You can email me at kimwalker@auburn.edu. For our session today, Dr. Green is going to go through a presentation. You should have received the survey in the mail, and he'll address that. If you have any questions, I don't know if he wants to take those at the end or during the session, he can let us know. Or if you would like to send in questions through the chat feature, we can read those out for you later on in the session. So now I would like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Green is an associate professor in the Department of Nutrition, Dietetics, and Hospitality Management in the College of Human Sciences at Auburn. He serves as the director of the Auburn University Metabolic Phenotyping Laboratory and currently holds the Mike and Leanne Rowe Endowed Professorship in International Studies. He obtained his PhD from the University of Connecticut in the field of molecular and cell biology, and then completed a joint postdoctoral fellowship at Pfizer in the Department of Cardiovascular and Metabolic Diseases, and then at the Stanford University School of Medicine. He joined Auburn in the fall of 2012. His research is focused on metabolic disease associated with obesity, including liver disease and colon cancer. He has a personal and academic interest in the Mediterranean diet. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Green.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Do you have me set up so I can share?
You should be able to.
Okay.
If everybody wants to mute their cells so you won't have background noise, and then if you have a question, just you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Because everybody see the slides there?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. As Kim said, I have both a professional and personal interest in the Mediterranean diet, so I can certainly talk about it, you know, anytime, all time. So kind of part of the life. I actually added 2 words to the title of my slide, and so bonus points to anybody for if they know their Latin or Italian. I won't say what those 2 words mean, but maybe you can tell me later on through the talk. Okay. So I just want to go over a quick outline of what I want to cover. I want to talk about just what the Mediterranean diet is, discuss the health benefits of the diet. We've done a number of different studies on the diet, and I've also led study abroad on the diet, focused on the diet. I have some pictures of food from Italy, of course, and all the pictures here are actually my pictures, and so they're related to the Mediterranean diet. Okay, so the Mediterranean diet, there's some interesting things that's been going on across really this country, but many other countries too. And it's really become quite popular. Even though a lot of people don't know about it, it's become popular. So the dietary guidelines actually have recommended the diet for all Americans. Now the new dietary guidelines are coming out very soon, and it'll be interesting to see if that recommendation holds. I'm going to guess it does. The Mediterranean diet actually has been recognized by the popular press, by the U.S. News and World Report. It's been the best diet the past 2 years. So top diet is what they think Americans should be consuming. American Diabetes Association recommends the dietary pattern both for the prevention and treatment of type 2 diabetes. However, there are a number of other organizations that are now recommending the Mediterranean diet too. The Alzheimer's Associations, the American Heart Association, I can just go on and on and on. Health professionals are recognizing that this is actually something that, you know, we should be concerned about, we should be thinking about, and Americans should be consuming. Okay, so what I'd like to show is a pyramid of the diet, and this is from the Spanish. And so each country, and I'll get into this a little bit later, kind of has its own little bit of version. I think the Spanish have done a very good job with their pyramid. What I like to talk about this pyramid is that if you look at what underlies the food components of the diet, there's a real social aspect to the diet. And if you notice at the center of the bottom of the pyramid, there's a number, they're sitting around the table eating. And so one of the terms over on the left there is conviviality. And so the diet is social, and that, you know, you want to spend time with other people, enjoy your meals, and not be rushed. So it's not, you know, grab your lunch on the road and eat in your car. You know, this is spend time with people, enjoy your meal. And so it's also respecting traditions, and there's a sustainability component to it. I also like this pyramid because it shows that olive oil is at the center of the diet, and I feel pretty strongly that that's a very important statement on part of them. If you notice at the top is sweets and red meats should be consumed in moderation. I'll talk more about the components of the diet though. And if you notice in the upper right-hand corner, it's wine in moderation, respecting social beliefs. So if we were going to talk about the Mediterranean diet in North Africa, we would not be talking about wine because it's not part of their religious beliefs. Now, of course, the Italians are their own people, and so they think quite differently. And so they think about the Mediterranean diet as more of this temple. And so, of course, this is all in Italian. And so, but holding up the columns are pane, bread, the cereals, legumes, and pesca, fish. And so underlying that is oil, water, vino, wine. So they play a little bit more importance on wine in Italy, which is not surprising. I also like the name is Dieta Mediterranea. Dieta also stands for diet, but it also kind of stands for life too. And so that's another way to think about the diet. In terms of the Mediterranean diet and the history of it, obviously people have been consuming foods in the Mediterranean region for thousands and thousands of years. However, we think that the ancient diet was really established by people living in Crete, and also the Romans playing an important role. And this is a picture of the Colosseum. And so, you know, back in the days when, you know, food was, it's not as plentiful, obviously, as it is now. And so one of the staples, particularly the Roman diet, was, and really of the poorer people, was bread, wine, and olive oil. And it obviously we wouldn't consider that a very good diet today, but it was a way for people to, you know, to get by. And so just to want to reemphasize this, that the diet really is considered a diet of the poor. However, that's flipping in today's world. And so obviously the wealthy people, the aristocrats, they had lots of money and they could buy all kinds of, you know, other types of food. And the poor were left with, you know, this really plant-based, pretty simple diet. All right, so if we think about the Mediterranean, as I said, that it's a pretty diverse area. The countries in North Africa are quite different than, say, Spain and Italy, and even going over to Turkey and Greece. And so there's a lot of variance of this eating pattern. So there's not really one diet per se, although I'll emphasize what I think is kind of what we think of the Mediterranean diet now. And so the other thing to think about is whether this term diet is actually really an appropriate term. And so, you know, I think it's actually not an appropriate term. It's a term that, you know, Americans are very comfortable with because we think about diets. There's, you know, billion-dollar industry on diets. However, it really a way of life is the way to think about it. About it that way, you're much better off. So in terms of where the Mediterranean diet really is existing, I think a good idea is to look at the cultivation of olives. And so as olive oil is an important component of the diet, you can see that all throughout most of the Mediterranean, olives are cultivated. And so, of course, it's really located in the coastal regions. However, you know, North Africa has a large amount of olive production. And a lot of oils we get here in the US are actually from North Africa. Spain is a massive producer, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Turkey. So all over, even along the Dalmatian coast, there's even some cultivation there. However, if I focus on this one area right here, which is Greece and southern Italy, that is really the area that we think of being as the heart of the traditional Mediterranean diet. And if someone was to say to you, oh, do you consume a Mediterranean diet? We're really referring to these areas here, Greece and southern Italy. Of course, the Greeks colonized southern Italy. And so there's a large influence of the Greek culture on southern Italy. And if you ever travel in southern Italy, you'll find that some of the best preserved temples, Greek temples, are actually in southern Italy, not in Greece. So if you want to see great temples, Greek temples, don't go to Greece, go to Italy. And actually, there's some very good ones in Turkey too. Okay, so this Mediterranean diet, obviously, you know, this is a rhetorical question. Is there evidence that it's healthy for us? And I have kind of a couple pictures here. I don't know if anybody's ever eaten just a whole plate of sardines, or actually, I think these are anchovies. I take it back, anchovies. And then, you know, the classic thing people thinking of, oh, eating a bunch of pizza together. Of course, these are students. They were very hungry after a long day traveling, and they were more than happy to eat pizza. Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about this evidence, and a lot of it goes back to this physician named Ansel Keys. And so he was really a cardiologist, although it says on here physiologist, but he was a doctor. He was a physician from Minnesota. He actually served as a physician in the war in World War II, was stationed over in Italy, and really kind of got to understanding the Italian culture. And together with a number of colleagues around the world, decided to undertake a massive study to look at the effects of diet, to look at lifestyles, and how it related really to heart health. And so you can see he was on the cover of Time magazine back in the early 60s. And a lot of what we know about cholesterol, fats, comes from these groundbreaking study. I don't have it on the slide here, but a huge limitation to the study is that this was only done in men, and clearly women get heart disease. And so, you know, in today's world, this study would never be undertaken with just men. But it was, the 50s was a different time. And so, so he was able to convince a whole bunch of countries to join him in this study. And there's some criticism that, oh, he left out some countries that would have gone against his results. But remember, he had to convince these people to actually join the study. And so I gave the website here, 7countrystudy.com. There's a huge amount of information you can get from it. There's been a massive amount of books, all kinds of articles on it, just an enormous amount of work. And so the premise really was that heart disease was lower in countries that bordered the Mediterranean Sea versus other countries. And so he tried to convince investigators in these countries bordering the Mediterranean to join the study with him. And so he found colleagues in Italy and Greece and a bunch of other places and compared it to, say, to the United States and to countries in Scandinavia and also in Western Europe. And so, and it really came also from his observation that he and his colleagues around Naples had recognized that people around Naples just didn't die from heart disease, whereas he was from Minnesota, and the people in Minnesota were dying from heart disease. And so he's like, something's going on here. And so they tried to really figure it out. And so we really know a lot about the Mediterranean diet, and as I said, lipids because of that. And so there's been a whole bunch of other cohort evidence that consumption of this Mediterranean diet is really part of a healthy diet that affects all aspects of disease prevention. And so it's really helpful for healthy aging. And so both physical and mental health. And if we look at some of the longest lived people in the world, two of the, I'd say 7 or so places in the world where people live the longest are in the Mediterranean region. And so, you know, it's a diet that, it's one thing to live a long time. It's another thing to live healthy. And so both physical and mental health. And so I think this has been recognized. And this extends, beyond just, chronic diseases that we think about. I was just reading an article recently, and I saw a question about kidney stones, and consumption of the Mediterranean diet is associated, I think, with something like 40% reduction risk in getting kidney stones. So you can think of it as just a general way to be healthy by consuming this dietary pattern. The other evidence that we have comes from this recent study called the PREDIMED study, and this is a study that was out of Spain. And so this was actually a clinical trial. And so the prior study, the 7 countries and a lot of others, were done really just by associations. Whereas this was literally, they assigned individuals a Mediterranean diet. And the individuals that they recruited were at high risk for heart disease and diabetes. And they gave one group instructions on how to consume a Mediterranean diet, but they also gave them extra virgin olive oil. And they gave them actually 1 liter a week. So could you imagine if you were to get 1 liter a week, could you consume 1 liter a week? Most Americans that would be way outside their realm. I can actually do it, but I consume a lot of extra virgin olive oil. And so I have this picture of extra virgin olive oil. This is actually in my backyard. And this is my selection of oils that I use. And I gave you this picture because I wanted to make a couple points about extra virgin olive oil. First of all, extra virgin olive oil, they often kind of say cold pressed, but what they mean is they're not using heat to extract the oil. And so it has to be extracted also by mechanical means. And if you notice, what's similar about all of these containers is that they don't let any light in. So when you buy your extra virgin olive oil, you should make sure you do not buy it in a clear bottle. Make sure it's either in a tin or a dark bottle. And you should also store it in a cooler place. And it should have a date on it, an expiration date, because the oil doesn't last forever. It typically lasts about 2 years is what we think. And you'll see that in terms of the expiration dates. So when looking for oils, look for that. There's also some symbols on there for product of origin designations that the EU does. And you can see some pretty good oils with that. I like the Greek oils. I like the Southern Italian oils. I think if you can get oils from Sicily, they tend to be pretty reasonably priced. Yeah, if you have any questions about oils, I'm more than happy to talk about it. And then, and the other arm of the study was that they gave others nuts as a way to promote the Mediterranean diet. And then they compared individuals that were supposed to be on a low-fat diet. And so their endpoint here was to see if they could actually reduce heart disease and stroke in these individuals. So literally through this intervention. And it worked. The extra virgin olive oil arm and the nuts arm, they mostly reduced strokes. They did reduce heart disease overall, but it was really from the stroke reduction. However, there's been a lot of other studies that have come out of this, and they've found that in this particular intervention study, that there's a protective effect on type 2 diabetes and certain forms of cancer. And there's just been an enormous amount of publications, and they continue to publish off of this. They followed these individuals for 7 years all across Spain. So this is a massive undertaking. The National Institutes of Health here in the United States is thinking of doing this study here. They have not funded it yet though, but I think this will be a fantastic study to be done here, particularly in the South. Okay. So I wanted to go over a couple of components of the Mediterranean diet that, particularly that was part of this study. And the first is extra virgin olive oil. I have a picture here of an olive tree. And so just to remember, olives are fruits. And so when you're consuming olive oil, you're consuming the juice, the oil from a fruit. And so this picture is of an olive tree in southern Italy that is over 800 years old. And so it's kind of hard to imagine that back in the Middle Ages, people were picking olives off of this tree to consume. And here we can get the same oil that they were consuming. Although I guess our oil is probably better than theirs was. But what about extra virgin olive oil? It has tocopherol, so it has a high amount of vitamin E. It also has these polyphenolic compounds. And so not that you need to know the structures of these things, but what's important about these is that they're powerful antioxidants. So here, the dietary fat, the main dietary fat that people are consuming has all of these nutrients in it that are super healthy for you. So that goes totally against the thought that fat is bad for you, right? No, this fat is actually very healthy for you. And so if you can substitute extra virgin olive oil for the types of fats that you normally consume, butter, vegetable oils, you're going to be getting all of these nutrients that you would not be getting. And so I think this is a very important component of it. Nuts was also a part of this clinical trial. And so I just wanted to cover that a little bit, why they would put that as part of it. And so one is that nuts have omega-3 fatty acids. And so this is an essential fatty acid. And what's important about these omega-3 fatty acids is that they're anti-inflammatory. And so inflammation is associated with chronic disease risk. And so we're always trying to lower our inflammation. And then it has these other compounds called lignans, and they're a type of phytochemical. They're actually a type of phytoestrogen because they look like the structure of estrogen. They're actually metabolized by the bacteria in your gut. And these metabolites are very powerful antioxidants also that can also lower inflammation. And so the Mediterranean diet, through these two components, in addition to fruits and vegetables, of course, it really help lower inflammation. And so that can reduce your risk for chronic disease. Okay, so I wanted to switch now and talk a little bit about my studies, but first talk about the Mediterranean diet in the US. And so what do we know about it? Well, first I need to start out with health in the US. And so I'm sure you're all aware of the obesity epidemic. And so, you know, obviously we're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic, but coupled on that, we have an obesity epidemic. And you could argue that there's an obesity pandemic going on across the world. And so you can see that, you know, in the South here, you know, we've struggled with obesity. And that really kind of follows up the Mississippi too. This is, and Colorado is the outlier here. And this is coupled with the stroke belt. So I don't know how well you can see this this diagram here of the map of the United States, but the darker areas really in the Southeast are where people have a much greater incidence of strokes. And so stroke is concentrated in the Southeast. It's also, we happen to be in the heart of the diabetes belt too. And so you can see that looks a little bit closer to the obesity prevalence. And so, you know, as I'm sure you know, we live in a very unhealthy area. And so that's what we're dealing with in this country. And we have to be cognizant of what's going on here. And so it relates to how I thought about some of my studies. And so I wanted to go over a few of my studies, not in great detail. I don't want to bore you all on everything, but just show you some of the stuff that we've been doing. And so the first area that I want to talk about is we've been looking at adherence, nutrition knowledge, and perceived knowledge barriers and benefits to the Mediterranean diet. We study students here at Auburn University and grocery shoppers in Lee County. We've also looked at participants in the stroke belt. And then we did a kind of an unusual study by looking at a Portuguese immigrant community in rural California. And that was really driven by a student that was in our internship program for dietitians. And then just very recently, I started working on this study to look at a relationship between Mediterranean diet adherence and COVID-19 cases and deaths. And we also performed a pilot intervention study here in Lee County to improve markers of heart disease. I'm not going to talk about this study, but if anybody has any questions about it, I'd be happy certainly to discuss it. So this first study I want to talk about is looking at Mediterranean diet adherence and nutrition knowledge in Lee County. We used a Mediterranean diet adherence screener, and that's the one that you received. And we also developed some nutrition knowledge questions that could parallel these questions on adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And then we actually asked a few demographic questions. So I wanted to give you an example of how we paired our nutrition knowledge to the adherence. And so for the adherence question, actually I think it's question number 2 on the survey I gave you, is how many tablespoons of olive oil do you consume in a given day? And so there's some choices here. And then parallel to that, a salad dressing made with mayonnaise is healthy, or is as healthy as the same dressing made with olive oil. And so clearly the answer to that is no. And so what I'd like you to do right now actually is pull out your sheet if you want to. And if you've actually checked off what you've done in terms of how you, what your selections are in terms of these questions, I want to go through it and you can mark down how many points you get. And so by the number of points that you get, you can see how you compare to some of the data that I'm going to show you. So the first question on this, this screener was, do you use olive oil as your main culinary fat? And if you answered yes to that, you can give yourself 1 point. The second question relates to how much olive oil you use. If you answered greater than 4, give yourself a point. How many vegetable servings do you consume? If you answered greater than 2, you can give yourself a point. Fruit units greater than 3, give yourself a point. How many servings of red meat, hamburger, or meat products? Less than 1, you get a point. Servings of butter, margarine, cream, less than 1, you get a point. Sweet or carbonated beverages, less than 1, gets you a point. How many glasses of wine do you drink a week? I'm surprised you're going to be surprised at this one. The point for this one is greater than 7. We were just curious about whether people would drink red or white wine. So there's no points associated with that. How many servings of legumes? So those are beans. If you have greater than 3 selected, that's a point. Fish, shellfish consumed per week, greater than 3 gives you a point. How many times you consume commercial sweets, pastries, cakes, cookies, all those things. Less than 3, you'll get a point. Servings of nuts, greater than 3, gets you a point. Do you prefer white meats, so chicken, turkey, rabbit, instead of the red meats? If that is a yes, then you get a point. But we were just curious if individuals were vegetarians or vegans. It didn't have any points associated with it. And then do you consume boiled vegetables, pasta, rice with a tomato type of sauce? And if greater than 2 would get you a point there. So the maximum amount of points are 14 for this particular survey. So now I'm going to show you some of our data from Lee County. Well, actually, I have students first, sorry, and I'll show you Lee County. So these are Auburn University students. And so we categorize these scores by low, medium, and high. So low is 1 to 4, medium is 5 to 7, high is 8 to 14. And so what you can see is I've highlighted here across the low is we surveyed students that were in different classes. And so they've been exposed to formal nutrition education to different levels. So political science students likely don't have a lot of nutrition education. Introductory nutrition students hopefully have a little bit more if we're doing our job correctly. And then if we're really doing our job correctly, the human nutrient metabolism, which are seniors in our program. And so you can see that there's a huge difference between political science students and our seniors in our program. And that holds true at the low and also at the high. And so political science, none of them were in the high. And so, you know, based upon your score, you can see, are you more like a nutrition student or are you more like a political science student? Okay, so you can also look at individuals that shop at the grocery stores or shop at the farmers markets. We were very curious that we thought, oh, farmers markets, maybe people are healthier there. You know, that's an assumption. We don't know that's true or not. And so, but we thought this would be a good way to test out and our survey instrument. And so what we found, though, is that indeed in the low category, that farmers market or people that were shopping there, and we did the Auburn Farmers Market and we did the Opelika one. And the shopping or supermarkets were the Winn-Dixie in Auburn and in Opelika. We didn't really see much difference between Auburn and Opelika. They seem to be about similar. And so you can see that, farmers market had low scores and a lot and more higher scores. And so, again, are you more like just the regular grocery shopper, or are you more like the farmers market type of shopper in terms of your score there? And so these scores are a little bit lower than what you would see in Europe, particularly Southern Europe, Italy and Spain and Greece, but they would be much higher than in Northern Europe. And of course, we published these findings, and it was pretty interesting. And I'm not going to talk about the nutrition knowledge stuff. I just wanted to go over the adherence. The next study that we did is we were interested in looking at the stroke belt, and we expanded our survey instrument to look at a behavioral model, this precaution, adoption, and process model. So looking at stages of change. We're interested in people, do they know about the Mediterranean diet? If they've heard about it, have they decided, that they may be interested in consuming it, or do they actually consume it and they're maintaining their consumption of it? And so we're interested in that data. So we developed some questions for it, and we developed questions for whether there are perceived barriers to consuming the diet or perceived benefits to consuming the diet. And so with this, thinking that, okay, the stroke belt, there must be issues going on down here that maybe are barriers or benefits that people don't know about. Maybe we could understand that a little bit more. And so we did this study, and shown here is a map of our findings. It's actually a heat map, and it's based upon colors. So the more purple the color, the more adherence there is to the Mediterranean diet. And so I've labeled the states in the stroke belt just by their abbreviations, but I'll just blow up Alabama here. And so you can see Alabama is really in the yellow, which is at the bottom. But we had to compare the stroke belt to something, so we compared it to California. And so you can see California is pretty hot. Although we're a hot state right now for COVID-19, California is a hot state for the Mediterranean diet. And so particularly in Southern California, but also in the Bay Area. But I also want to pay attention to this. There's a string of kind of colors that are coming up in Central California. And that's a little bit relevant for what I'm going to talk about in terms of one of our studies. And so that's really the Central Valley of California, which is a lot poorer than the Bay Area and Southern California. And so the stroke belt has much lower adherence than California does. And what we also learned from this is that individuals with a bachelor's degree or greater education had high adherence, and low adherence was observed in individual participants that were obese. In terms of barriers in the stroke belt, convenience was perceived, sensory factors, and health were conceived as barriers to consuming the diet. Benefits in the stroke belt was weight loss. And so people in the stroke belt thought of the diet really more as like a regular diet, like you would, the keto diet or something like that, just a diet, as opposed to more of a way of a life. Okay. So this next study was looking at these Portuguese immigrants. And so we used the same survey instrument that I just showed you. And so here, the rationale is that some immigrant communities can adopt the culture of the community, and so they lose their culture. And when they lose their culture, and we can also think about this as food culture. So when they lose that culture, they tend to become unhealthy like us if they're coming from a community or a country that's healthier than us. However, some maintain their culture and can really hold on to it. And so we are curious about this, and we are curious because I said we had a student who was in the program, and he was from this Portuguese immigrant community. All the people we knew were Portuguese. His family spoke Portuguese in the household. So he was really interested in his community. That really came out of the study. Very enthusiastic, did a great job. And as I said, this community was in Central California, and I think it's a unique population, and they're Portuguese. Okay. And so I'm sure you're not super familiar with Central California. So I wanted to just show you the areas where I'm talking about. So the first is Turlock. So this is the Portuguese immigrant community in the Central Valley. It's not a very large town. They're not very highly educated in this community, and it's not a wealthy community. But we had to compare this to something. So we couldn't just study it in an isolation. So what we decided to do was to compare it to Livermore. And so Livermore is also in the Central Valley, but on kind of the fringe of it, although they kind of consider it this Tri-Valley area. But it's really outside of the Bay Area. It's really more of a rural, although the Bay Area has, if you've been out there, it's grown massively, and now people commute from Livermore, across the bay to San Francisco. So, but it's a more educated community, and it's socioeconomically it's better off. So you would expect in rural areas less education. Just showing you what I showed you in terms of the students, you would expect to see a lower adherence to the Mediterranean diet in this rural area. And so, but that's not what we saw. What we saw is that the adherence to the Mediterranean diet was higher in the participants in Turlock, and so significantly higher than those in Livermore. And so this immigrant community it appears, have maintained their food culture. And so, and even in despite that they're not as well educated and they don't have as money, overall. And so what we also found out is that overall, if we look at everybody in the population, both Livermore and Turlock, the higher the education, the higher the score was, though. And so that was a general trend. Some barriers, and actually the other thing I want to point out here is that the adherence was higher in men. All of our studies, we've only seen higher adherence in women. And so this was quite unusual. I don't know what's going on there. It's something that we'll have to look at. Barriers to consuming the diet in Turlock were convenience and sensory factors. So maybe, the ingredients, they can't quite get the exact same thing. Although talking to my student, he said that they only have a Dollar General in Turlock. That's their grocery store. And so he said, even in the Dollar General, there's a little section just of Portuguese foods. And so they can get some of their foods, but I think it's just not as fresh as they would normally be getting. Benefits in Turlock, lots of benefits we're seeing there: health, weight loss, natural content. It's familiar, price, mood. It makes people feel better. So it kind of makes sense, some of the data that we see here in terms of barriers and benefits. So kind of an interesting, unusual study. Obviously, I don't know a ton about Central California, but my student really brought me along on this. Okay. So the last study I'm going to talk about is an ecological study that we've been doing, and this is really, we're doing it right now, and obviously this is very hot stuff because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so, is there a relationship between Mediterranean diet adherence and COVID-19 cases and deaths? And so we had to get a bunch of different data. Actually, we can't do this study ourselves. We have to rely on data from elsewhere. And so, first of all, we're aware of published studies that had Mediterranean diet adherence in Spain and in 24 other countries. So we were able to obtain that data. We can obtain COVID-19 cases data and death data from the New York Times has a compilation of data that they put together, and it's done in a scientific way, actually. It's posted onto a database where people put a lot of stuff, data, and so it's not like just the papers doing it. This is actually legitimate tracking of the cases and the deaths. And so, and then what we're also interested in is, because there's lots of things that could affect cases and deaths, right? And so we decided to look for factors of well-being, and there's this well-being database for countries. And so we decided to use some factors, these factors: income, because income plays an important role in your health. Education plays an important role. Housing, so how dense people are together, we know that's important for the virus. And then the environment, how healthy is our environment? Obviously, COVID-19 is a lung disease. And so, looking at air pollution kind of makes sense to see if that may be a factor at all, or we could adjust for whether this is a factor. And so what I wanted to show you first is the data from Spain. And so we picked Spain first to look at is because first we could obtain that Mediterranean diet adherence data, and we could get all the other data. But Spain also has a national healthcare system. And so if we're looking at different regions across Spain, there really shouldn't be huge differences between the regions in terms of the healthcare. Whereas in other countries, in our country, you know, go from one state to another, healthcare can be quite different. Go from one city to another, you know, it can be quite different. Ask one individual to another, it can be different. But what we did is we looked at the association between COVID-19 cases and Mediterranean diet adherence. And it was actually done in this adequacy index score. And we saw, and this was a model in which we adjusted it for all of those factors of well-being. And so what we saw was a very significant relationship that was actually pretty strong between high number of cases and low adherence. So as adherence goes up, then cases are much lower. And so this was a little surprising because you can think of that there's got to be a lot of other factors that are playing a role here. And so how can even a diet be associated with this? But, you know, a word of caution here is that this is not looking at individual people and saying whether they consume the diet and then whether they got COVID-19 or not. This is an ecological study, so we can't say this is causal. However, it suggests that there's a relationship. We also did and I wanted to point out, and I pointed out a couple regions, is that the region of Spain that has some of the highest adherence is Andalusia, which is the region way down in the south of Spain. And the two regions in the north, Castile and Leon and Rioja, those have lower adherence and they had the higher cases. And so I must also say that the cases, and when we looked at deaths, it was all normalized to the population. You can imagine that just, you know, more people live in an area, so of course there's more cases. So we normalized it to that. So it's not, there's just more people there. We then did the analysis looking at whether the deaths from COVID-19, whether there's a relationship with the Mediterranean diet adherence. And again, we saw a very strong relationship that was significant. And so, you know, very surprising. I had a graduate student who's working on this with me, a master's student, and Dr. Frugier from our department. And so I said, this is probably, we're not going to see anything here, but let's just do it. I'm just curious. And so lo and behold, we do see something. Then we took an even more difficult one, was to look at countries. So was there a relationship between COVID-19 cases and deaths across 25 different countries? And so here, you know, every country has a different response. There's different medical systems, different healthcare systems. You know, there's so many differences that you would think could be driving this. And so, but we decided we'd look anyway. And lo and behold, we did see a relationship between Mediterranean diet adherence and deaths. And we only saw it in our model in which we adjusted for these factors of well-being. And so the countries with very high adherence, Turkey, Greece, Japan, Portugal, had low numbers of cases. Here in the US, we have high. I should also say this data was obtained in June. Obviously, every day the data is changing. The UK has had a problem. We've had a problem. Spain and Italy are actually outliers here because Spain and Italy actually have fairly good adherence to the Mediterranean diet, but they're, you know, the COVID issue there was, you know, they had a major issue with it. And so of course they've passed and they've done much better. However, you know, this was back in June when this data came from. So, you know, we were really surprised. Again, word of caution here, we can't say that the Mediterranean diet, you know, this is causal. However, there appears to be a relationship. And there is a whole biological basis behind this in terms of what I just talked to you about in terms of extra virgin olive oil and components of the Mediterranean diet that are anti-inflammatory, because COVID-19 is really, I don't know if you've heard that they call it the cytokine, the inflammation storm or the cytokine storm. So it's a massive amount of inflammation that occurs in some individuals, and that really alters the outcomes. And so if you can consume a diet that's anti-inflammatory, you know, maybe you have less risk. And also if we think about the comorbidities associated with COVID-19, it's all of the chronic diseases that I show you are a problem here in the Southeast. If the Mediterranean diet is good for reducing the risk for those chronic diseases, those comorbidities, then maybe that would help out with COVID-19 too. This is all a hypothesis, and it really needs to be tested, but our data suggests this. Okay. Some take-home points. The Mediterranean diet really is a plant-based diet. We think it can reduce the risk for communicable and non-communicable. So we're talking about infectious diseases and then our chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease and stroke and Alzheimer's. Adherence is lower in the stroke belt where we live compared to California. Here in Lee County though, participants that had increased nutrition knowledge, farmers market shoppers, increased, the students with more nutrition knowledge, they tend to have higher adherence. And then remarkably, adherence is higher in a rural, poor immigrant community, which is not what you would expect. And so I think that shows that, rural areas, there's hope for the rural areas, I think is what it tells me. Now, of course, that's part of their culture, the Portuguese culture. However, I think we can do things here in the rural areas. At least I hope we do. I'm hopeful. Future studies, I want to continue to examine adherence and knowledge behaviors or barriers and benefits, but I want to focus on some university students, both here in the US, in both Auburn and other universities. We have part of our survey instrument translated into Italian. We're in the process of getting it translated into Greek. We already have it translated into Portuguese. I'd like to get it translated into Spanish so that we can do these studies in other countries too, because they're interested in barriers and benefits and knowledge and all the things that we're interested in too. So, and then finally, I think it'd be fantastic to do something in the community, somehow promote the diet. I don't think we can necessarily have to call it, the Mediterranean diet. Maybe we can somehow come up with a new name, but somehow we need to get people to eat healthier. And maybe this might be a way to do this. Okay, how am I promoting the Mediterranean diet? Well, first of all, I certainly discuss it in all my classes. I try to be respectful and not just push one diet. I talk about lots of different diets, although I do talk a lot about extra virgin olive oil and the health benefits of it. And then I lead a study abroad on the Mediterranean diet. And so here are several of the cohorts that have gone through the program. And so, we do a variety of things throughout. Obviously, we did not go to Italy this year, and we were planning to go to Greece also. And so the students were very disappointed. However, they understood and they knew it was for the best. Some objectives: we want to explore the Mediterranean diet. We want to explore it there. So we can certainly study it here, but there's so much more to doing it there. It really is an experiential learning. And so we go out and do things, and that's the most important. And so the role of food and culture and sustainability are kind of all wrapped into this. Shown are a few pictures here. We always take a cooking class. These are dishes that the students made with a super talented chef in Rome. And they were fantastic. They did a great job. I could eat those any day and every day. So got to acknowledge there's been a lot of people that have helped out, a lot of students. There's been a lot of students that have gone on the study abroad with me that are now registered dietitians. And so this is a way for them to learn about the diet and then use it as part of their profession. I've also been working with the Gusto Lab Institute for Food Studies in Rome, Italy, for the study abroad. And so I do want to acknowledge them. They've been pretty influential in some of the work that I've done. And so finally, I end here with if you have any questions for me, and these are just pictures of the students doing cool, fun things that we do, visiting temples, food producers, learning about slow food. If you've never heard of slow food, it's a movement, and generally enjoying ourselves, but learning, and it really changes the world perspective of the students. and gets them more in touch with food and healthy food. And I think that's important. And they take it home and it translates to their friends, their family, and then hopefully their clients and in the professional world. So I'll end with that, and I shall stop my sharing. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Green. There have been several questions that have come in on the chat.
Okay.
So Tricia would like to know if there are, in your studies, if there are any consideration to other parts of people's lifestyles regarding stress, for example, that are taken into your studies. Like the value of afternoon naps, downtime, eating at different times of the day, things that vary from typical American practices.
Right. I think that's a fantastic question, because really, if you think about truly what the Mediterranean diet is, there's a social component to it. And so that stress that we have of always being on the run and all that likely is playing a role in our health. And so we have not measured those. And so, but I think that would be very good to do. And it would be nice to, you know, if we were to do a larger study, an intervention study, we could actually take blood samples, and instead of just asking people how they feel, we could actually look for markers and see if they really are stressed. So I think that would be fantastic to do. And so, yeah, I think if we can all slow down a little bit and enjoy our meals, I think we're going to be better off.
Okay. Also from Tricia, she said there's a question about carbonated drinks on the survey, and she wants to know if sparkling drinks such as club soda or sparkling water were considered sodas or carbonated beverages.
Yeah, good question too. Yeah, I would say no. And so really it would be anything that would be added sugar to it would be it. And so when you start talking about diet sodas, that gets a little bit tricky because you're not adding calories. However, there's a lot of work that shows that diet sodas actually don't help out with weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's another story.
Right. All right. And from Joanne, the 7 glasses of wine a week that are recommended, she says she assumes you recommend red wine. And if so, not all red wine is the same. So do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I would definitely go with the red wine. The red wine has more polyphenol content. And so remember, I was talking about the extra virgin olive oil has these polyphenols. The red wine has more than white wine does. And so if you look for a wine that's more tannic and so has, you know, there's more stronger flavor to it, you're going to get more polyphenols. I was glad to see, actually, the camera doesn't get too close on me, but I was drinking a red wine from Sardinia, and it has some of the highest polyphenol content. I was also eating a bunch of cherries, though, so maybe that played a role. And my lip was purple, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to look horrible here on this talk. But so, you know, some of the red wines definitely have very high content, and there has to be a qualifier with the wine, though, in that, you know, we're really only talking about moderate amounts. And of course, this is highly emphasized with the students, is that this is moderation. And so once you start going beyond that, then there's associations with poorer health. And so, you know, you need to be respectful, and it really should be with the meal. And that's the best way to consume it, is with the meal.
Interesting. Huh, okay. How do other oils such as avocado, sesame, etc., and grapeseed oil, how do they compare with extra virgin olive oil?
That's a great question. And I talk about this in my class, and I focus on coconut oil a little bit more because coconut oil seems to be the most trendy. And so if you compare them side to side, you'll see that extra virgin olive oil has more of the polyphenolic compounds and more vitamin E. And so I think from a nutrient perspective, I think extra virgin olive oil is the better choice. However, those oils actually are very healthy too. You know, things like walnut oil, avocado oils, you know, but they're expensive. They're really expensive. And so, you know, I tend to just go with the extra virgin olive oil because of the cost and the health benefit. In terms of the vegetable oils, my recommendation would be for canola oil. It has monounsaturated fat, and stay away from the corn oils would be a recommendation. You know, try to not consume those. Or palm oils, I would stay away from those too, personally. Yeah.
Okay. Someone's friend claims that olive oil can be bad for you if you heat it up too high. Is this true?
I hear that one a lot. And so I do have a slide on that for my students. And so whenever you heat oil, if you notice when it gets too hot, it smokes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's called the smoke point. Every oil has its own temperature that it starts to smoke. Once it starts smoking, it starts forming these compounds that are actually very poor for your health. And so you do not want to have your oil smoke. It turns out that extra virgin olive oil is pretty good. It's actually in the medium category. So as long as you don't deep fry your food, you can use extra virgin olive oil to do all your cooking with. And it maintains those polyphenolic compounds so you don't lose them. So it's great to cook. So as I said, I consume a large amount of extra virgin olive oil because it's the only thing that I cook with. And then I just use it in general for everything else.
And this is a question for me. I know you said cold pressed olive oil is what you should look for, but among the cold pressed olive oils, are there some that are better than others? Should we look for specific regions?
Yeah, you know, and I think the cold press is really a marketing term. I think all they're doing is saying that they haven't used heat. So, but, you know, world market, if you live in Auburn, they sell a Sicilian olive oil, which I think has a pretty good high polyphenol content. If you can find Greek olive oils, I actually go to Atlanta to get mine, and I get it in a 3-liter tin, and I find that that's fantastic. If you see a DOP, that's a designation of origin, designated origin of product that's done in Europe. And so if you see any oils from Europe, Italy, Spain that have that, I would go with that. I do buy the California oil. I think it's the main one from California called California Growers or something. That one's actually pretty good. You can get one that says robust. And so the more full flavor the oil, the more polyphenols, the better for your health. Now, the problem is many people don't like strongly flavored oil because they didn't grow up with it. So my suggestion is get an oil, whatever you can, you know, tolerate in terms of the strong taste of it, and then consume that.
Okay. Kim McCurdy would like to know where you can find recipes that you would recommend.
Oh, whew. I do have a couple cookbooks on the Mediterranean diet. And so I think they're pretty good. You can just type in, you know, I think I got them from Amazon. So there's several out there that are quite good. I think I have a Spanish cuisine cookbook called The New Spanish Diet that I love. It seems like everything I make from that is fantastic. And it seems to follow really the Mediterranean diet for the most part. So yeah, I don't know. Look around is what I would say. And I think as long as you're focusing more on a plant-based, it doesn't mean you have to be a vegetarian here. It just means that you really should not be consuming lots of meat all the time. However, meat can be a part of the diet and a part of your meals. Just don't make it all of your meal.
Okay. Brittany sometimes sprouts her own legumes like lentils, chickpeas, and she wants to know if it's worth the trouble.
I would say yes. And the fresher you can get your food, the better off it is. So this time of the year, you know, as I said, I was just eating a bunch of cherries. The cherries are fresh right now at Kroger's. I bought a huge bag of them. They're fantastic. So anything you can eat fresh, I think is great. Dr. Fellers or Dr. Craig Schmidt could chime in on that too.
And a long question from Leah. She says, with regard to consumption of olive oil, she's of Mediterranean and Italian heritage. She says this is a comment, not a question. She says her favorite is Laudemio, Laudemio. Do you want to say that for us?
Laudemio.
Laudemio.
Can you hear me?
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
that's
Yes,
the olive oil that you recommend.
Okay, I'm not familiar with it, but I think the Italians make some fantastic oils. The oils from, I always look at where they're from. The oils from the Tuscany area tend to be a little bit milder. They actually score very high because they're kind of a mild, wonderful taste. The ones from the south, if you look for Puglia, that region has very strong oils with lots of polyphenol content. And that tree that I show you, the very ancient one, that was from Puglia. And I can tell you the olive oil that I bring home from there is fantastic.
Okay.
All the more reason to go there.
Kim McCurdy wants to know what you buy organic. Do you recommend all organic or?
Ooh, that's another one. That's a toughie. We do buy some organic. However, I don't know if any of you have read The Omnivore's Dilemma. If you have not read The Omnivore's Dilemma, I recommend it. It's from Michael Pollan. And so, you know, I'm not going to buy an organic pear from Ecuador. However, I'm going to buy the pear from Lee County. But I still do buy some organic fruits and vegetables. And you can, if you've ever typed in the Dirty Dozen in terms of fruits and vegetables, there are some fruits and vegetables that really have a lot more pesticides than others. I think strawberries are quite high. And so we do buy some, but I try to go more local, really, than paying attention to the organic aspect. Although I'm not against it. And a lot of other countries, like in Italy, they do organic more of a way of life than, you know, a whole nother industry. And so I'm not opposed to it, but I think there's some pluses and minuses to it.
Okay. Betsy wants to know if you have considered doing any research regarding the Mediterranean diet as it relates to arthritis. She's personally had a good experience with that.
Sure, yeah. So arthritis is an inflammatory condition, autoimmune condition. And so the healthier the diet, the better controlled. And so I'm not aware of any direct studies that have been done on rheumatoid arthritis, but if I was to guess, I would guess that there would be benefits.
Okay. Okay. And we have some questions that came in when people registered. So I'm going to open those now. First question from the survey: is this diet detrimental to kidneys?
Yeah, it's actually the exact opposite. It's actually very healthy for your kidneys. And so, yeah, I saw the question earlier, and I had lunch with a good friend, a professor over at the vet school, and he said that he had the most horrible pain the other day, and he had a kidney stone. And I said, you know, I was just looking up something about this, and you know, I've seen, you know, pretty good risk reduction associated with kidney stones in people that consume the Mediterranean diet. So I would really say that any organ system, you're going to have a hard time finding that the diet is detrimental.
Wow. Okay.
If you do find one, please let me know, because I would like to know.
Okay. We had a question about whether or not this was applicable to a typically busy lifestyle. So I guess what I would say is, how do you adapt this diet if you don't have a lot of time?
Yeah. So the one thing to think about the Mediterranean diet is, you know, I mean, I love Italian cuisine. I love Spanish cuisine. I love the cuisine from that area. However, we consume a lot of Mexican food. We consume Asian food. So you could take these principles of a plant-based type of diet and apply it to other cuisines. And so thinking of, I tell the students, you know, something as simple as black beans and salsa and avocado. You know, you can make tortillas and have, you know, you can make something very simple that is very quick. And, you know, maybe you want to have a little bit of chicken with it or something like that, or maybe some shrimp with it would be even better. I like fish with it personally. So you can do a lot of things that are quicker, particularly in the legume areas I think that's easier, you know, chickpeas and things like that. But you're right. It's hard. I would agree. It takes planning to really, yeah, it's not easy. I feel for people.
And last question that was on here was how the diet can be adjusted to accommodate food allergies, specifically tree nuts and fish or shellfish.
Yeah, those are great questions because, not everybody can eat nuts, not everybody can eat shellfish. And so, but I think if if you're like going through the scoring system here and, it's going to be pretty hard to score a perfect 14 on this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be some components likely that you're not going to consume. And if you look around the Mediterranean too, there are differences across the Mediterranean. And so, I think, not consuming nuts is okay, but you really should be making sure that you get your omega-3s in another way because you really need to get them. If you don't consume nuts and you don't consume shellfish or fish also, then that makes it a little bit harder to get your omega-3s also, but you can get it from other plant-based sources. So you can still consume the dietary pattern even with these allergies. You're just not gonna, you're just gonna be substituting one thing for another.
Mike, I've got a question related to that. Have you considered adding allergies and allergic to things as a constraint? Because nuts and fish are two of the greatest allergens, particularly food allergies. And that's one thing, because I'm allergic to fish and it's very hard for me to follow a traditional Mediterranean diet because I'm allergic to fish. And the same thing applies to people that are allergic to nuts. So that to me is a major constraint of whether you follow it. And of course fish was only 1 point and I got 0 on that, but you might consider that.
Yeah. So, and I think if you look at our high score range, we go from 8 to 14. And so with the idea being that we know there's going to be things that, some people just can't consume. And so, but you're right, the allergies, but, I would say the biggest thing is if you have celiac disease, because really what underlies the diet is that carbohydrates and whole grain bread, whole grains. And so the other thing I should mention, this diet is not a low carb diet and it's not a low fat diet. And so the whole craze on low carbs, these people are consuming high amount of carbs and they live the longest in the world. So you have a hard time convincing me that carbohydrates are that bad. In a general sense, there are carbohydrates that are bad, and you can see it on the score here is, the sweets and the simple sugars. So yeah, there's a lot of subtleties to this, I would agree.
And Paula wants to know if pecans are a good nut choice.
Yeah, I would say any nuts are. The only thing I would recommend is that, unfortunately, here in the South, we tend to put a lot of sugar on them and make them candied. So they do taste better, I would agree. But there's been a lot of studies that show that walnuts have some of the highest amounts of omega-3s. So, but, I would just say any nuts. And I try to mix it up, different nuts for different dishes as a way. Because every food is different. And that's why you should be consuming a variety. You should not be eating broccoli every night. You should be eating a variety of greens.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. I learned so much. I hope everyone else did as well. And I do want to remind everyone that we've got our inaugural Women's Philanthropy Board Book Club coming up in the next couple of weeks. So if you would like to join us for that, we'll be reading Your Meaning Legacy. We'll meet a couple of times and then we'll hear from the author herself. So if you want to know more about that, you can email me, Kim. It's Mary Elizabeth, MHF0005 at auburn.edu or Kim Walker at auburn.edu. And our next roundtable we have coming up will be on August 4th. It's Tuesday, August 4th at 12 o'clock. And it's going to be on budgeting like a boss. So we're excited to be offering that. And finally, I want to thank our corporate sponsors who help to make programs like this possible. And they are the Alabama Power Foundation, Auburn Outreach, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Chambliss King, EAMC Foundation, Flower Store, UBS, and Warren Averett. So thank you to them, and thank you to every one of you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Good job, Mike.
Thank you.
That was great. Is he gone?
I think so.
Now I'm going to eat lunch, and I know that I'm going to order the spinach and strawberry salad with walnuts instead of the chicken fingers and fries.
Good for you. Good for you. We're doing better already.
Thank y'all. Thank you, Margaret.